So again, today's daf is daf Yud Gimel, and the Gemara is bringing another sheet about whether a ketana could become a muberes. Rav Zvid Amar. Rav Zvid holds that we divide up the girls into three categories. There's the girl from 11 to 12, the girl from 11 and less than 12, the girl from 12 and more than 12. And ein bonim below simonim, if she is in that year between 11 and 12, then we have a chazaka that she had simonim, and she becomes a gedola. So the Gemara says, "V'nivdok." Why don't you check out whether she really has simonim, whether she has saros or not? And the Gemara answers, "The chayshinon shema noshru." We assume that the absence of saros doesn't prove anything, because this proof about banim is so strong that we assume she had simonim. And that starts even from the time that she became pregnant. So the Gemara now is going to ask, based on a machlokes recorded in Masechet Nida Daf Memvav, regarding the case of a girl who's 12 years old and one day, and they checked her out and she has no simonim. Rav Papa is of the opinion that we assume she has no simonim. Rav Papi is assuming that after the age of 12, we assume she had simonim. The fact that we don't find them in the B'dika is because chayshinim shemenashu. We are afraid maybe they fell out. So the Gemara says, the answer that Rav Zvid offers would reflect the shita of Rav Papi, who says choshesh. Elamandi Omer ain't choshesh, but shita Rav Papa, and we're not choshesh that noshra simonim ha'ikol meimar. Again, we should check out and see if she has simonim or not. If she doesn't have simonim, she's still a ketana. So why does that Mishnah say that we cannot have chamoso mima'enes? She might have given birth, she's still a ketana, and therefore there's kedushay miyun. Like more answers, afilu l'man di'omer ein chosheshim mishum tsar leida chayshinon. It could be that although in general, we don't assume that the saros fell off, but in this case that she gave birth, it could be the labor pains and so forth caused some of her hairs to get lost. So let's just review Rav Zvid. Rav Zvid is saying that in this middle case of a girl who's between 11 years old and 12 years old, it's considered as if she's after 12 if she would have simonim, and in that sense, from 11 to 12 in Rav Zvid's frame of reference is almost identical to above 12. That's that middle section. And simonim would make her into a gedola, which is a machlokes in Masechet Nida Daf Mem Hey and Bebeis, where the toch hazman kilifnei hazman domi, v'yeina simonim el shumim bi'alma, o kiliachar hazman domi. So Rav Zvid here reflects the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi that toch zman kiliachar zman domi. And we do recognize the validity of simonim, and therefore if she gives birth during that period of time from 11 to 12, she becomes a gedola because ein bana below simonim. We believe that she had saras. And even if we find that she doesn't have saras, we assume noshru. our Mishnah says, Ketzad Pochos Tzorasein. And the Gemara asks me, Nani Mili, how do we know that in a case of Arayos, not only does the Erva pat up the Tzara, but if that Tzara has another Tzara, then the other Tzara, that's called the Tzara, is likewise Ptura. So let's say, for example, his Bas went ahead and got married to his second brother, and that second brother if the Tzara of his Bas got married to the other brother, and then the brother has another wife besides the Tzara's Bito, and if he dies and falls for Yibum, then Tzara's Tzara is also Ptura min Yibum. Now, the source for a Tzara being excluded from Yibum, which we saw back on Daf Gimel, is Isha lachotza lokach litra. Legalos arvasa alea bechayeh. So the extra word alea is used for Gzeres Shava because in the Parsha of Yibum it also says Yevamot yavo aleha, and just like the aleha in Achos Isha is b'makom Yibum, because we borrow the aleha from Achos Isha and we put it into the Parsha of Yibum. And the Torah says Litzar to teach me that even the Tzara has the same status as the Erva HaTzara. Minani Mili, how do we know even Tzara is like an Erva? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar Kral Litzar, below Lotzur. There's an extra resh. We could have said Lotzur. Lotzur. Didn't have to say Litzrar. And Ator Ripsa Tzaras Harbe. Ravashi says, I don't need that drush. I can derive Tzara from a Svarahi. Tzara, my time, Asira, to B'mokum Erva Kaima. The Tzara herself is back to the status of an Erva Veishas Ach, since there's no mitzvah of Yibum in the case of the Tzara. And Tzara Nami B'mokum Erva Kaima. She too is in the identical situation where there's no mitzvah of Yibum, falling back therefore into the erva of Eishes Ach. The Mishnah says, Ketzad Mesu Hain, Tzoroseim Mutaros. Is Haisa Bito Achas Mikol Arayis Elu Nesus Li Achiv, below each Acheres, Mesa Bito in his Karsha, Biakach Mes Achiv Tzorosim Mutaros. So if there were two wives to the late brother, and he had divorced the one that was an erva, then the other wife falls for Yibum. She's not called the Tzaras erva because he divorced her. Or let's say she died. So the Gemara now wants to know the following. This is the Gemara's analyzing this question. When we say that the Tzara is muteres, does that apply even in a case where the Tzara was married to the late brother before the late brother divorced the other wife who's an erva, who's Bito, Shel Ha'achiv, Shel Ha'yavam? Or should we assume that the Misa of the Bas, meaning of the Erva, preceded the Misa of the Ach? And the Gemara now is going to be medayik from the language of the Mishnah. It says, V'lo isha cheres u'mesa bito. It's mashma that before his brother married the Tzara, who was not an Erva, only afterwards did his wife, the Bas, the Erva, die, or did he give her a get? And that's what the Gemara says, is Afilu Konas Ulbasov Girish. He already married the Tzara. So let's say he married Rachel, who is Bas Shimon, and then he married Rachel. I'm sorry, he married Rachel Bas Shimon, and then he married Leah. And subsequently, Reuven divorced his wife Rachel. For a minus, the Gemara has a kasha from a Mishnah later on in Daf Lamed, Shlosha Achim, Naimem Nesuach Shtei Achios, Liechad Nasui Nochus. So Reuven and Shimon are married to Rachel and Leah that are sisters. Levi is married to another woman. Iresh Echad Mibali Achios is Ishto. Now, keep in mind that vis-a-vis the other brother, let's say Reuven's wife vis-a-vis Shimon, or Shimon's wife vis-a-vis Reuven, is an Erev of Achos Ishto, because they married two sisters. And now one of those two, whether it's Reuven or Shimon, divorced his wife, and then he died. No, I'm sorry. Okay, so he divorced his wife, and then Levi, the third brother, Umeis Hanosi Linachos, who's married to another woman who's not related to Rachel and Leah, dies. Uknasa Amagarish. So that one brother who divorced his wife was Miyabem, the wife of Levi. Let's say, for example, Shimon divorces his wife, Leah, and then after Levi dies, Shimon is Miyabim, the wife of Levi. So now, Mace, the Megarish himself, Shimon, dies. Now, just 1 second. Now we get back to Reuven. He's married to one of the two sisters, and now he's Miyabem, the wife of Levi, who's a Nochus. So the Gemara is Medai. Look carefully at the sequence as defined here in the Mishnah Daf Lamed. Taima, the reason why the Tzara is Muteres to Reuven is the Giresh v'achakach konas. That first what happens in sequence is that Shimon was Megarish's wife. And then Reuven is going to marry Levi's wife, the Nochus. So there was never a moment in time when the Tzara v'achos Ishto was Chal. And the implication is that if you change the scenario in the sequence, then Avol Konas, if first, switching the order around, the Baal Hachos Hashnia, which is Reuven, would marry the wife of Levi, Virak Acharkach Giresh, and only afterwards he would divorce his wife's sister, Lo. The Nochris would not be Muteres Liyochim. Even though at the moment of the death of his brother, she was no longer a Tzara of Achos Ishto, but nevertheless, Bechaya Baal, they were Tzara Zulazu, Amrab Yivya Tavra, which literally means we break it up, these two Mishnayos, Misha Shana Zu, Lo Shana Zu, it's Machlokes Tanoim. And each Mishnah reflects a different sheet in the Tanoim. Chai Tana, the one who's Matir the Tzara, even if before he married her, and then afterwards he divorced the Erva, Savrash and Misa Mapeles. We look at the moment of Misa, that's the Nefila for Yibum, and at that time she was not a Tzara Erva. For Hai Tana, and that Tana that we saw in the later Mishnah, who was not Matir the Tzara, unless he divorces his Erva and only afterwards marries the tzara. Sara nesuin rishonim matir. The nesuin itself is already a sort of like in potential the hapola liyibum l'chshayamos, and therefore already she becomes the tzaras erva at the moment of nesuin. Rava amar li olam chad tanahu. You don't have to reconcile this apparent contradiction by attributing the two Mishnayos to two Tanoim, but rather v'zo v'ein tzarich lomer zo ketanu, which means the following: even if he marries the tzara and afterwards he divorces the erva, the tzara is muteris, like we saw in our Mishnah, and it goes without saying that if he was megarish and then he married the tzara after he was megarish the erva, then for certainly she's muteris. So don't be medayik that it's otherwise. We're now up to that part of the Mishnah of Kol Sheichol L'Mayin V'Lo Miyana B'Chai Baila. So we're talking about Kiddushin the Rabbanan of a Ketana. And she wasn't Mima'enes during Ruvain, the late Ruvain's lifetime. And Sarasa Choletzes V'Lo Misyabemis. And that means that since Midrabanan there are Nesuin, and she's an erva, then there's no yibum to the tzara. She's a tzaras erva midrabanan. In a Torah, there's no marriage here, so she's not a tzaras erva. So the Gemara asks, why are you telling me that she had to be ma'enes b'chai baila while her husband was alive? To go in hashta, let her now be miyabim even after the misa sabal, and make a declaration, I'm not interested in that kiddushin that my mom or my brothers married her off to the late husband, and then tisyabim, then the tzara could fall for yibum. Why do you tell me choletzes ve'ena misyabemis? The miyut is oker than a suin lemafreya. So as a result of the miyun, in the yavam, she was never married to her late husband, meaning the brother that went to his world, and therefore the tzara was never Taras Erva. Lema Misayel Leila Rav Oshia. We have machlokes later on Daf Kuf Zayin between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai actually about the din of miyun. Beit Shammai is of the opinion that there's only miyun in the Baal. There's no miyun in the Yavam. Beis Hillel recognizes miyun not only in the Baal but even in the Yavam. And now we have machlokes within this machlokes, two deis as to how to interpret Beis Hillel. Yom Rabbi Yochia mima'enes lemamaro v'eino mima'enes lizikaso. Miyun is only operative for the mimer of the Yavam. That means that if the Yavam was Makadesh Kedushay Maimar, this Ktana, then she doesn't need a get. She could be Mima'enes of the Yavam, and that's it. And that removes the Maimar with Miyun. However, Choseres Lizikos, she goes back to the state of Zika, and there's no Miyun on the Zika. Miyun cannot be operative lemafreya, to be mafkia, the Maisa that was done, the Maisa Kedushin, or the Maimar. So if the Miyun cannot be mafkia, the Zika of the Yibum, therefore, l'chalitza shenases b'dei adam, so ein koch biad hamiyun lafkias zikas zikasa liyibum u'lechalitza, and let's just work this out 1 second. The miyun cannot be mafkia the zika liyibum u'chalitza shenases b'dei shamayim. Right, so we're not talking about mimer. Now there was no mimer. And if there was no mimer, Eino mimam enes lizikasa. Oh, and therefore she needs chalitza. Good. I just read it wrong. She needs chalitza. And the Bar Plukta, later on, of Rabbi Yosha is none other than Ula, and Ula disagrees. He holds that she can be ma'anis even in the Zika. And she's muteris l'shuk, without any chalitza, through miyun, by being ma'anis in the yavam, and that removes the Zika Sibra. And again, that means that miyun is oker the nesui abal harichon lemafreya. And therefore she was never skuka to his brother, and there's no need for chalitza. So from the fact that the Mishnah is not matir the tzara, unless she was memayin in the erva, unless the erva was memayenes during the life of her husband, we can now prove Rav Yehoshua Shita that ein koch biad miyun lafkia zika sibu, even according to Beis Hillel. Whereas according to Ula, she could be memayenes in the yavam, even after the death of her husband, and then she would be matir the tzara. And the Gemara rejects this. Lo, that's not a proof. Really, ma'enesi b'zikasa. And nevertheless, the miyun is not going to be effective to be matir the tzara, mishum the tzaras erva shining. This is going to be a gzeira that the ketana cannot be memayim and be matir the tzara for yibum. The Tani Rami bar Yechezkel, a ketana shemiyano bebal, hareyu muteres li'aviv. She can marry her husband's father. She's not called an erev of a kala because the miyun is okel mafreya, the kedushin to the son, and therefore she was never a kala. She's equivalent to what we call mefutas b'no, and she's allowed to marry his father. But miyano b'yavam, if on the other hand her husband died and now she's memaenes in the yavam, asur li'aviv, she cannot marry the father of her husband, a late husband. Alma, what do we see from this price of Rami bar Yechezkel? Nesuya ben generated a zikas yibum, and mishas nefila, from the moment that she falls for yibum, and there was not yet a miyud to be oker the kedusha, nireis kikalosa. In the eyes of the spectator, she looks like an erva of kalosa, even though miyun is oker the kedusha ben lemafreya. But here in the case of yavam, where there's a zikas yibum, it's not apparent to the eye of the spectator that through her miyun we can remove the entire nefila for yibum, and therefore it looks like she fell for yibum as kaloso of her late husband's father. So in order to avoid this pose, that people might think that miyun is in a case of zikas hayibum, bilvad v'lo kedusha rishonim, therefore she's asura b'yaviv. We want to avoid this mistake that the people think that the miyun is only effective vis-a-vis the yavam, but not vis-a-vis her original husband. And in order to make sure that we avoid any such a mistake, we'll say she's asur b'yaviv. And the Gemara now explains the answer that hachanami, here too, in the case of tzaras bito hamema enes, even though the miyun is going to establish that she was never married, and therefore the tzara is not a tzaras erva, nevertheless she's asura machmas maras ayin, because the spectator, the mishas nefila, before there was an akira of the kedusha bas al yidei miyun, His Kiko saw Kiddushin Elu Yibum. That Kiddushin generated an afila for Yibum. And Nireis Kitzaras Bit. It looks like a Torah of a bas. And now we get to the mission on the bottom of Yud Gimel. Sheish Arayos Chamuros Elu. 6 arayos, which we'll enumerate in a minute, are chamuros vis-a-vis the 15 arayos that are listed in the first Mishnah. Because in the case of the first Mishnah, the 15 arayos are suros on the Yavam, but not vis-a-vis the other brothers. And therefore, that one particular Yavam is asur in Yibum to the Erva and to the Tsara. That has no impact on the other brothers. The Mikra Nisu li Echav, li Achiv, v'naflu l'fanav li Yibum, arena asuras af Tsaroseyen. What's unique about the Sheish Chamuros that we're going to list is Mipnei She Nisuos Lacherim. There's no possibility that the Erva could have been married to any of the other brothers in these 6 cases. And therefore, she can only be married off Lacherim, to someone who's not related, outside the family circle. And so it's saying Mutaros, because we have a halacha that an erva does not generate an Isa Tzara unless it's b'makom Yibum. In other words, an erva can't be machadish a special Isa called Tzaras erva. There's no such thing. What it does is it removes Yibum, b'makom Yibum, and therefore she goes back to being an HSA. Here's the list of the 6. Imo, right? She's not only the father's wife, but she's also Imo. And if she's Imo vis-a-vis all the brothers. The Eshes Aviv, okay, this is a case of a woman who is married to his father, to his father. It's not his mother. The Achos Aviv, Achos Aviv, Eshes Achi Aviv, Eshes Achim Aviv. All these cases are cases in which there's an erva on all the brothers equally. And now we get to the main sugya of Beit Shammai, Beis Hillel regarding tzara. Beit Shammai matirim tzaras liyachim. Beit Shammai never bought into this whole concept of being mafkia yibum because she's a tzaras erva. Beis Hillel osrim. Beis Hillel say that a tzaras erva is asura, and then it goes down to tzaras tzara, etc., etc. There's no chalitza, and there's no yibum.